My next guest is an experienced B2B SaaS sales executive who's helped many companies go from $0 on up to an over $30 million in annual recurring revenue. In this episode, he shares 5 powerful lead gen sources and 1 powerful closing strategy. All right, let's get right to it. Please welcome Ryan Staley. Ryan, welcome back to the show.
What's up, Sean? Happy to be on here again, man.
Good to have you here. So why don't you kick us off and tell us about your background for the listeners that don't know who you are?
Yeah, so super quick background on me. I guess if you look at my career, everything has been evolved around revenue growth. So started off had pretty much every single crap job you can have in sales, specifically in B2B space. I had B2C before, but B2B, moved up the ranks, mid-market, enterprise, and then did the same as a leader. So grew from underperforming units into top performing units, grew a business unit from 0 to 30 million in ARR in 5.5 years with only 4 salespeople. We didn't have any marketing, we didn't have any SDRs. And so effectively what I did is once I left that company about 3.5 years ago, I started helping companies implement the same strategies to their business. So how to hyperscale without having investment or PE from the strategies and tactics that I used to do that. And then over the last year, I've been obsessed with AI and how to integrate that into sales and marketing so you can hyperscale yourself even more, right? Than kind of what we did before. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of where I'm at, man. I have a podcast just like you called The Scale Up Show, where I share tips and tricks on AI and sales and marketing, as well as interview top, tech founders. And then, that's kind of what I'm focused on right now, man.
I love it. And with that previous episode, this was actually season 1 of Payback time. I had you on and we talked about that journey of going from about 0 to 30 million ARR. And I think you at the time just left your last corporate job and were going full time with what you're doing now. So I was listening to you talk to Myron Golden. Listeners out there, if you don't know who Myron is, this guy's a sales expert. He's very good. And you guys had an awesome podcast there. So I recommend checking that out. But you mentioned you grew your business by 300%. So I want to talk about that a little bit. Then I'm going to talk about SaaS sales strategies because I'm big on SaaS. Then we're going to lead up to some AI discussions at the end. So why don't you tell us, how did you grow your business by 300%?
Yeah. So I think and this is something that's been prevalent over time. It's really interesting because the whole AI shift, I completely pivoted my business. So that was effectively through consulting. So I started in 2020 in the prime middle crappiest time of the pandemic, right before the point where people started washing down their groceries and stuff like that. It was right before then, which is, always an interesting time. And so started off at first, I was just trying to figure out what the hell I was doing and what I wanted to do and who I wanted to serve. And I had ideas because I had this deep well of expertise in sales. And so what happened was it was funny because I just started meeting with people. I was looking at working with sales reps and then sales leaders. And what started to gravitate people towards me is when I told my backstory on what I did. And people were amazed, that 0 to 30 million in ARR, because that's something that VC-backed companies will do, but they will have 30 people doing it, right? Mm-hmm. And they'll have tons of cash they're throwing at. I did it with 4 people in a red ocean market that was highly competitive. So it wasn't I was selling the next, sexiest thing and first to market or anything like that. I didn't have a Tesla as it came out. And so what I kept doing was I just kept reaching into that and looking at folks in terms of how I could serve them. I kept refining what I call my perfect customer profile, which was the top 20% of my ICP. So if you look at it, the best of the best in terms of profitability, revenue, as well as time to close. And then I focused on that deeper, integrated that actually into my podcast because I started getting companies that wanted to work with me that were guests on the podcast, and then basically converted that into new clients. So that's kind of how it happened. I mean, that's a real quick summary of it, but from A to Z, that's how it happened.
One strategy you just highlighted there, which makes a lot of sense, is getting people on your podcast. Your podcast sounds like a lead gen tool. It's not only a value add to listeners, but a lead gen tool. And then you have that warm introduction. And I assume from there, do you help, you bring them on as a reoccurring customer, introduce what you can do for them? Walk us through how that process works.
Yeah, so it was one of those situations where like that wasn't my intent when I started the podcast. I just, I love podcasts personally, just like you. And so like I'm like, all right, I want to do this. But what started happening on accident was that I started interviewing my prospects, and then it naturally started to happen where people are like, hey, so what exactly do you do? Like, walk me through that, right? And because they enjoyed the experience, they liked that I was promoting them. And then I'm like, what happens if I start to lean into this, right? And so
Mhm.
that's what I started to effectively do is I'm like, yeah, I'm going to actually focus on this, have the right people on my podcast. So it was really good because like I covered so much ground, had access to anyone. And then you look at it like what happens effectively when you're like, if you think of it, it's rooted in human nature. So a lot of folks will reach out now, they'll leverage a spam cannon of a sequencer of
Mhm.
shitty sequences and try and get meetings with executives, whereas like I could send out a sequence of emails inviting guests that fit my exact target and profile of people that I think would be good to have on the show, not just for potential clients, but also for the listeners, right? And the hit rate was amazing. I think like on average, the response rate was probably like 35-40% just from emails sent out. And then what happened was I just interview them, understand about their business, their journey, where they want to go, and the outcomes they want to create. And then often that segue into things that I could help them with. And so that's kind of how it all went down. It was pretty seamless in nature. And there's actually a couple companies that I've helped with this. One of them, it was a founder, and basically she had about a $2 million company. I met her at SaaStr, and she's like, "Hey Ryan," she's like, I one of my biggest issues is pipeline, right? Like I don't have enough pipeline, I don't have enough prospects. And so I said to her, I'm like, well, what are you doing on the content side, right? Like,
Mhm.
what's your approach to that? And I walked her through and basically did an engagement with her where I helped her set up her pipeline, create that not just as a front end pipeline engine, but also a content machine on the back end. And she got close to $500,000 in pipeline before she even launched her show.
Wow.
So got access to group presidents of like Walmart and 7-Eleven in different countries. And those are people she wouldn't have been able to access. And so that's just kind of an example of what's possible. I'm now actually, it's funny, had a couple other companies reach out to me that are larger in scale and really want me to help them do this because like, if you have a large ACB, it's like fishing with dynamite, right? Like it's one of the hardest things in the world is to get pipeline with high ACB prospects.
Yeah.
But this is a mechanism to do that. And so it's something that I would highly, highly recommend leveraging if that's your space.
Yeah. To touch on some of the acronyms here, ACV, actual annual contract value.
Yes,
Got
correct.
it.
Annual contract value. Sorry.
And then ICP.
Ideal customer profile.
Got it.
PCP is perfect customer profile. So think of that as
Got it.
like if Pareto's principle had a baby with your ideal customer profile, that's what your perfect customer profile.
Well put. All right. So just a pause point here. I do like to talk to the audience a little bit. So Ticker is a B2C SaaS, and we don't have to, or I don't have to jump on Zoom calls or do presentations that get people into the platform. B2C is very low touch. You want people kind of trying it out. Netflix is a great example. Duolingo is another good example. But where Ryan plays, his space is B2B SaaS. And that's a different animal. You can't just put up a site and add a lead magnet and people are going to be coming in and buying. You have to, we're talking bigger dollar amounts here. So people are going to be spending more money, which means you kind of have to, you got to kind of work it as a consultant and walk them through the value ladder. So Ryan's specialty again is that. So I'd love to dive in a little bit on touching on how do you help companies, because your business is whaleselling-systems.com.
It's
Correct.
actually it's RyanStaley.io, and my company is Whale Boss. So I
Okay.
I did that email domain specifically so I wouldn't get hammered as much with spam and outreach. You know what I mean? People just copying it. So
Sure.
that's been effective so far.
Lesson learned there. Create a really long email so it's hard to copy. That's awesome. All right. So let's dive into how do you help companies generate more leads for B2B sales? And then we'll transition to how do you help them close more sales?
Yeah, so I think there's multiple ways to do this, and this market's exponentially changing over the last few years. So, like if you look at all the external pressures, the model of SDRs is dead, in my opinion, right? Like there's still use cases, but the one size fits all, have a sales development rep, reach out, make calls, send a ton of emails, like that is a dying breed and there's multiple reasons for it, right? There's more and more barriers than ever before that existed to prevent that from happening. And so there's a lot of other ways to do it, which I think are highly more effective. The number one thing that I would look at, though, whenever you say leads or pipeline, is it always correlates back to your annual contract value, right? Because like kind of what you mentioned with B2C, it's very simple to get someone to hit on a website. Not very simple, I should say. It's a different kind of process. It's not simple,
Yeah.
right? It's a different skill set. But to attract folks or to leverage influencers or joint ventures to do that and get them to try your product and use it, right? Versus trying to get access to a C-level executive at a larger company. I mean, you used to be at a larger company, right? You know how it
Right.
works in the
Exactly.
executive position. It's a much different play. So your options for that are outbound, like I mentioned, is one of them. I like referral-led growth is one that I think is really strong. That's massively underutilized, and so effectively, that's systemizing customer to prospect referrals through your client base. Which you'd be shocked with how many companies do not do that. It absolutely blows me away because referrals close in 75% of the time at 125, 150% of the close rate. So it's like
Wow.
it's literally insane. Podcast is a pipeline, one of the things that I mentioned there. And then the third one that I believe strongly in is effectively, and these are all non-AI related, by the way, right? Like
Right.
you can integrate AI into them, but they're not relying on it. I mean, there's community-led growth, so you could effectively work in a community where your ideal customer profiles are, answer questions, be helpful, and then you can convert them into like a Slack community, right? You could do that and convert them into appointments. You could do it via social, kind of leveraging the same principles within there. And then, last but not least, one of the things that I think is often missed if you look at outbound or targeted prospecting is there's so many associations, groups, or centers of influence that are out there. And so one of the things I think is often missed is effectively if you target those groups, like you got to find them that have the exact niche of your customer,
Right.
right? Not just your general space. So for example, like I would look for something if I was targeting CIOs, I would look for something that's targeting the CIOs within the specific verticals that we had, and with the exact type of clients we want. Pursue them, ideally get a board member of that group as a customer, and then push that out. So that's kind of how I would approach it in a real quick snapshot.
I love that strategy. I've thought about that. Here's another example would be, let's say you're selling a cybersecurity product. And I
Yeah.
talk about this with my audience, especially when you're investing in stocks. I really like cybersecurity. This is not financial advice, but Fortinet is a stock I hold. And the contracts can be hundreds of thousands of dollars and up to millions of dollars a year. You're not going to sell that with like one email. It's like you got to get people on a call. But
Yeah.
how do you get how do you get in front of a whole bunch of businesses? You can be part of like a cybersecurity association. And it could even be niched down into like, let's say cybersecurity for manufacturing or for
Exactly.
pharmaceutical, and get in front of the board and say, hey, I have a product that can help these people. And that can be an easier process than trying to knock down doors.
Oh, without a doubt, man. I call it vertical to horizontal, right?
Yeah.
So, and it was funny, like real world example, company, I don't know, they're about 30 million. I was working with them. They had 14 different verticals that they focused on because they had a horizontal solution. However, we found that 86% of their last 3 years revenue came from three verticals. They had no
Mm,
specialization. It's just what they did was especially unique and valuable for those verticals. So I'm like, hey, what do you think would happen if you focused instead of like dispersing your time across all 14 of these verticals? What happened if you focus like the majority on these three? Do you think that would be valuable? Like everything from enablement to
sure.
talk track to events, like you mentioned. And yeah, because I did it and it helped us double our deal size every year and then 100x our largest deal size when you do that.
Love it. Circling back to the first strategy you mentioned, outbound. When I think of outbound, I think of, Alex Hermosi is big on calling. Like his reps, part of his companies have to be making 200 calls per day. Is that kind of what you're talking about? Is that consistent calling?
Yeah, it's calling. I think like it's a little different because his dollar value for what they're selling. It's like, and well, I guess I'm trying to think of like his old company,
Hmm.
Jim Boss. It's not Jim Boss. What was it?
Gym launch.
Gym launch, that's what it was,
Yeah,
right? Acquisition.com is probably different because of the fact that they're trying to access CEOs that aren't hanging out on social as much, right?
sure.
So yeah, so I would imagine it's a combination of calling, emailing, engaging on social. There's a lot of different ways to engage people. But
Mhm.
I would classify it in that bucket.
Got it. Okay. I've got five here you listed, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here on my note-taking ability, but I've got outbound, referral-led growth, podcast, community-led growth, and associations. Is that broken down correctly?
Yeah, it's perfect, man. And then like often the sweet spot is when you integrate multiple
Sure.
strategies or multiple levers. It like the level of maturity that you're at in the business depends on which one you want to pull first, in my opinion, right? So that's kind of how I would approach it.
I love number two, which is the referral-led growth, and I assume a conversation would be with a current customer, and you can raise the question, do you know anybody else that is in your line of work that would be open to a conversation? Do you kind of pitch it like that?
There's multiple ways to do it. I think like there's a lot of affiliate models and
Mhm.
referral programs for lower end
Sure.
dollar spend, right? What I've kind of discovered and why I started to focus on this is because like we got when I was a revenue leader, we got $20 million deal from Whole Foods, Amazon, from a referral from a deal we didn't even win, right? Like that's how we got into the opportunity. And so like once again, kind of like with the podcast, I'm like, what would happen if we just leaned into this, right?
Mhm.
Or a company that's got 500 customers, what would just happen if you leaned into it? It's like that fishing with dynamite or bringing a gun to a knife fight, right? Like those are the kind of things that happen. And so most people treat referrals as an event instead of a process. So just like you have a sales process with multiple steps that creates the end result versus a one-time like, hey, will you buy this shit? Same thing with referrals, right? Like that's a piece of it, but you also have to integrate like what's the right time, what are the emotional peaks that the buyer's having, because they do go through ups and downs, just like a relationship or a marriage, right? Where there's ups and
Mhm.
downs, right? Asking them in the right way at the right time, and then giving them an incentive that is genuine and doesn't make them feel dirty, right? Because as you know, working at a bigger company before, there's limits. Sometimes there's a $50 limit on what you can accept as a
Nice.
gift, right? Because of policy. So there's ways around that. You could donate to their charity. You could give them information instead. You could have them be part of an exclusive mastermind within your own company. So there's a lot of different ways you kind of leverage it from an incentive structure.
Got it. I like that approach, the referral strategy, a bit more than outbound. That's not my jam, but I know some people are good at they're good
Yeah,
at
no,
making those calls.
it works really good. It's one of those things that just like anything else, it requires work. And most people think, as Hormozy would say, they think there's a silver bullet when it's really 100 golden BBs, right? That you
That's
need to
it.
execute on it. And just with any other, just even creating content, doing a podcast, anything that you can think of, it's not you just show up and then it just starts raining like a hurricane. Like it requires work and consistency and optimization over time to get you there. Now, granted, there are better paths than others, but that's kind of the way it is, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
I like how you phrase it. It's not an event. In other words, one ask, it's a process. That's the key right there. Because I see so many people making the mistake as they ask once, well, this strategy isn't working. And well, it's more than just asking once. It's a process. And as you said, you hit them in those peaks and valleys where their emotions may be high one day, low another day. How do you work through that over time?
Yeah, exactly, man.
Cool. Cool. All right. We touched on lead gen. Let's go to the end of the equation here, which is closing. I assume in this world post COVID, you're trying to coach your customers on doing a lot of Zoom calls or team calls. Is that correct?
Well, those happen anyway. I don't need to coach them to do that. It's
Okay. As
like
opposed to phone
natural.
calls.
Yeah, I mean, like I think here I would take it one step further, and especially with larger deal sizes or even mid-market deal sizes, like they're like, and there was a study done on this. Did you see the study done on Zoom versus in-person reactions?
I did not.
I think there's like, God damn, I wish I would have saved that article. I gotta look at it. But there's close to, and I think like a 70% higher level of stimulation in a person's brain when they had an in-person
Mm.
interaction versus over Zoom. It was like
Oh,
related to the neurons in your brain and like the attention levels and all those different areas of when you had an in-person meeting. And so like I think, and here's a prime example, like there's folks that I met with, they were local, right? And always met with them virtually. And I'm like, why don't we get together? Like, we're close to working business together. Went up, met up with them. It was an awesome experience. Got to know them at a completely different level versus like a Zoom meeting, which is often time blocked of like, okay, I got this one, then I got the next one, then I got the next one, right? And so that in-person meeting allows for variability, and it could be coffee, it could be food, it could just be a sporting event, or it could just be just physically meet with them, for a live meeting, and it'll be transformative, which so many people are ignoring right now, which is crazy.
So does that mean we switch back to a mode where we're jumping on planes and meeting people in person?
I think there's a hybrid, right? I think it's so funny because before it was like I'll jump on planes and everything like that. A lot of the virtual meeting stuff sucked because we tried to use it for a while.
Mhm.
Then it's gone to all virtual meetings, and people dread being on back to back to back to back Zoom meetings,
Yeah.
right? Like it actually drains your soul if you do that, and ages you, which I actually believe it does age you. But I think there's a good balance, right? You can qualify shit upfront by having those Zoom meetings and make sure it's a really good opportunity. And then once it's focusing, go do the live stuff. I think that's still really critical and important.
Love it, love it. So we kind of teed up closing. Let's dive in a little further. What are some strategies that work really well for helping close sales, especially the
Yeah.
larger dollar size?
Yeah, so this is one of my favorite ones, and I would love your feedback if anybody ever leveraged this with you. When you're in your prior corporate life, right? So what I would say is that the big one for me is I call it a reverse close. So effectively, once you get to the end of the process, if you look at it, we got what I say is a strategy meeting, which a strategy meeting is more like a dry run. So that's making sure if you have a complex sale that all the variables that you're making assumptions on are there. The ROI is clean. The buy-in's there from alignment across multiple different buckets, budgets, and departments, right? And everything's working in unison. So once you have that, basically you're getting verbals on everything, and you're tightening up the last few pieces of the buying process, right? So like that's that meeting. When it goes to proposal meeting, most people don't do that strategy meeting. So I think that's one of the biggest mistakes people can make,
Mm.
right? Then when we look at the proposal meeting, what happens is you go through there, and a reverse close effectively is like, okay, we agreed to this. You basically identified, and you start from, I should say, let me take a step back. You start from the end and work backwards. Okay. So what you want to do is understand from the potential buyer, when do they want to implement? Not when do they want to sign the agreement, but when do you want to start implementing this? Like, what would be a target date that you have for that? Say it's February, right? So if it's February, then you work backward and say, okay, we need, let's say, 2 weeks prior to implementing for onboarding and all of that. So absolute latest, we need the contract signed by mid-January. Okay. What are all the checks and balances on your end you need to go through prior to that agreement getting signed in terms of legal, in terms of board meeting approval, in terms of sign off? And what'll happen through that process is you have an estimate of those dates for each one. You write them out on a sheet, and then you talk through those, right? Like you have it on a PowerPoint slide, and you say, okay, implementation this date, signing this date, negotiation this date, this person, and like, what am I missing, right? And you have a dialogue about it, because a lot of times buyers don't really comprehend all the steps involved with it because there's so many different areas. And so what that does is that basically brings any kind of objections to the surface. It brings out, like, if they're not ready, if they're not quite where you thought they were going to be. And so then it makes it really simple, transparent, and visible to what you need to do to make that happen as a reality, while covering all the objections at the same time.
Gold.
Thanks,
That's
man.
amazing. Appreciate that. That is awesome. I love it. I know people selling B2B here are going to be like, okay, all right, I have to do that. So that makes perfect sense. And I'm actually, because we're in a growth stage here with Ticker, I'm on the receiving end. So that strategy just walked through. There's a sales guy I was on a call with a marketing agency that was literally doing not the same what you walked through, but pretty similar. I'm like, I see you. See what you're doing there.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, good for him or her. That's
Yep.
awesome.
This podcast episode is sponsored by Ticker. Ticker is a platform that helps you manage your own investments with confidence. Check this out. Let's search for Apple. You can see Apple is on sale. That's looking good. Score is 61 out of 100, and margin of safety is 75%. Higher the score, the safer the investment, and the higher the margin of safety, the higher potential returns you can make. In this case, you can see the share price is 175 as of the recording of this video, and the upside potential, the fair value, is 398. All right, let's look at a different stock. We'll go to GameStop. In this case, GameStop is overpriced, scores 39 out of 100. That's not looking too good. And the margin of safety is 0%. Here's some other features within. You can create your own custom dashboard. I like to set up and take a look at the top gainers and losers in the last 24 hours. I also like to take a look at the top search stocks, but you can really customize the dashboard to whatever you want. We have stocks, ETFs, crypto. This is a big one. We have a watch list tool that allows you to add stocks to the watch list. And if anything changes, such as that score or margin of safety, you automatically get notified. I call it the set it and forget it feature. And then we have portfolio trackers and alerts. So if you're looking for strong stocks, want to avoid bad stocks, and learn how to invest, I invite you to join Ticker for free. Let's transition to AI. Since you're spending a lot of time on artificial intelligence, what are you doing to maybe help your own company and then help your customers?
Yeah. So internally, I've created what's called the prompt matrix, and I have my team and myself doing work that would never have been possible without this. And so effectively, the way I kind of look at it is you look at a lot of the AI products out there. 95% of them are built on top of the large language models, right? Now, there's other ones that are, it's probably maybe 90% now, but they're built on the large language models. And so my view is if you truly understand and own and understand how to dominate the large language models in terms of usage, then you could arbitrage the other $10,000 a month you would need to spend by just understanding the core foundation of it. And so I've done that from pretty much, I use it in every part of my business. We're an AI first business, all the way from content creation to strategy to time to execution to arbitraging money, like all those areas I leverage internally. And so that's kind of how I approach it. And like I said, it's not just sales, it's not just marketing, it's operations, strategic thinking, product, everything. So that's how I kind of approach it. And basically what it is I leverage best in breed prompts that I can innovate on top of, categorize, have a library. And then basically what happens is the beautiful thing about it, Sean, is now if I want to execute something, I have it set up so I just type in one word and it has a very long involved prompt that executes for me so that I don't need to do it. So I not only prompt and understand how to do it better than 99% plus of people, but I can now do it 95% of the way faster, right? And then I just keep innovating on top of it. That's what I do for my company. And then I'm doing the same thing for other organizations, helping them with their revenue function, because literally BCG Consulting did a study with Harvard, and you could effectively 200% the output of people by doing this when you span it across quality, quantity, and speed. And so that's what I'm helping companies do so that they can create asymmetrical exponential results with, and it could get implemented in a week or 2 weeks.
Sure.
So yes, that's what I'm helping companies do. And I have a sales AI accelerator to help companies or individuals do that on their own as well if they want.
What I'd like to do is just go a layer deeper to give a tactical example of what that looks like. I know this might be part of your service offering, so don't give the whole recipe away.
That's okay, man.
But let's walk through an example of how this works in practice.
Yeah. So I look at 5 categories: time, execution, acumen, money, and skills. Like those are the category buckets that I think you could leverage it for. And so I'll give you a couple examples. There's like, if you look at it through a jobs to be done structure, right? Like what are people actually doing on a day-to-day basis? You like an example, let's say for sales is something that took 15 minutes and you do it, I don't know, 15, maybe 20 minutes or a half hour. Let's say it does a half hour and you do it daily, right? If I can cut that to a couple minutes, that's a lot of time you're getting back in your week,
Wow.
right? And that's just one task. So if you look at sales or marketing or a lot of jobs, think of it. Remember when we went through the Industrial Revolution where folks were doing everything by themselves with like hand digging everything. And then we started operating machinery to do that for us. The weird thing is we've gone through that same cycle again, where white collar workers are doing everything with all these minutiae tasks, like all these tiny tasks, and it's death by 1,000 paper cuts. And so if you leverage AI, you could have the same transition that the Industrial Revolution had, where instead of like doing the white collar tasks like we did before the Industrial Revolution, we're now doing that on the knowledge worker side, and you can let AI leverage and do a lot of that for you. So that's one example in terms of time. Another one that I look at is more of a deep work function. So I actually did a post on it on LinkedIn effectively, and I've talked about this on my podcast, the Scale Up Show. But what I created is a whole entire sales organization in 20 minutes. So effectively what I did is identified what the comp structure would be for a team that I was hiring, what the KPIs are evaluated on, how to manage them on a quarterly, monthly, weekly process, how to create a tech stack for them for under $1,000, and then how to create a job description to actually hire them. I did that all in 20 minutes, right? So that's like a deep work application you can leverage for this as well.
That is incredible. Great examples. And I love the tie back to the Industrial Revolution and how we're facing the same issues today. I have experience within the insurance space. And there are so many repeated steps done over and over manually. And it's like, I remember asking this question 5-6 years ago, like, isn't there a better way? Like, can't we use AI? Make this easier?
Man. You're on the forefront if you're talking about 5 years ago. So makes sense.
Yeah. No, this has been great. Before we jump to the rapid fire round, is there one great takeaway you can give to people selling B2B?
Yeah, I think like it's hard right now for a lot of folks because there's a massive influx of tools, especially with the whole AI revolution. I mean, it's exploded in the number of tools. So I think like the number one thing, if you have your own company or you're a seller, is become a master of getting attention, right? And it takes work, but there's a deep well of building your own show and creating content that's organic, that people want to hear from, that's valuable to other folks. So it's effectively like the product-led growth approach of attention. And so no matter what space you're in, what type of company you have, if you're in B2B, those are table stakes right now. And a lot of people are still not doing it. They think if they just spam out, hundreds of emails a day, it's gonna make that happen. And it's gonna get worse and worse with that. And because of new restrictions with Google has and some other email providers, it's going to disrupt a lot of companies. So I would say focus on that, and then that'll take care of everything else, right? So that's the number one thing.
I love that advice. I'm actually starting to see people who are not just business owners, but people who work for companies that are starting their own podcast to help like really solidify that. What you just said is become a master at getting attention. And it's like you kind of take this personal branding, which you're building up this moat around yourself, because not everybody's going to start a podcast and stick to it, but a company may want to hold on to you longer. They may elevate your value within the company, and other companies may see you and be like, I see what you're doing there. Hey, we've got an offer for you. Conversations could go that way. It's cool. I just met a guy this week that not a business owner, but started his own podcast and helps promote the products within the company he works for. I thought it was a brilliant play.
Yeah. Sharp, man. Sharp move.
Cool. All right. Well, let's transition to the rapid fire round. This is the part of the episode where we get to find out who Ryan really is. If you can, try to answer each question in about 15 seconds or less. You ready?
Yep. Let's go, man.
All right. What is your favorite podcast?
I like Marketing Against the Grain from HubSpot. It's got the CMO of HubSpot and the CMO of Zapier on it. Really good stuff there.
Awesome. All right. What is a recent book you read and would recommend?
Oh, so many, man. One of my favorites, and I give this to the CEOs that are on my show, it's called The Gap in the Gain by Dan Sullivan and Ben Hardy. Love that book. It's about measuring backwards to create momentum moving forward.
Nice. All right. What is your favorite movie?
It's funny. This goes back to my childhood. One of the first things that come to my mind is Goonies, which is like an old school movie. I would say that. You go more like recent times. I really like Ready Player One. I thought that was cool. I don't know if it's my favorite though, but they don't make them like they used to, man. It's tough.
We could go down a rabbit hole on this, but I was talking to one of my best buddies last night. Like the amount of good movies coming out, it is like few, and maybe it's a sign of me. Well, you and I getting old.
Yeah, you see so many, like you get jaded, right? So I think that's part of it.
To those that are not watching the YouTube version of this episode, you're just listening. He's got a Tommy Boy picture behind him. Brilliant movie.
Thanks, man.
Classic. All
Love
right.
it.
Next question here. What is the worst advice you ever received?
Um, yeah, I would say, work for the same company, just put in your time and things will work out for you.
Yeah,
That's what I would say is the worst, especially now. Maybe that used to be true, but it's not the case anymore.
it ain't 1955 anymore, that's for sure.
Sure, man.
All right, flip that equation. What is the best advice you ever received?
Yeah, I think and it really comes to like, and there's a lot of things I could say on this, but like failure is a requirement, not an option if you want to build something amazing. And that's probably accumulation of advice from a lot of CEOs I've had on my show, as well as leaders I've worked for. Because I used to be afraid to fail and would do everything possible not to, and it held me back in so many areas of life. So I wish I would have known that when I was younger.
100% agree. I see so many people held back because of that fear of failure. It's like you have to fail forward, fail fast. My audience has heard me say that before. Sorry to be a broken record. But what Ryan just said, spot on. All right, last question here, the time machine question. If you could go back in time to give your younger self advice, what age would you visit and what would you say?
So what age you would visit is a good one, man. I think there's a couple things. If I went back to 21-year-old Ryan, there's two things I would say. Is like, don't drink so much, right? From that perspective, you're going to waste away a lot of your life. And then the other aspect was, and I wasn't a raging alcoholic by any means, right? I just went out on the weekends and did that, right? And then the second aspect is like, if you want something, don't wait, go after it and just make it happen, right? Like you don't need to be a certain age to do something. You don't need to have a certain level of experience to be able to pursue something. And you build it along the way is kind of the way I approach it.
Just to drill in there real quick, Ryan's in Chicago, so it's not too far from Milwaukee. Did you go to a state school in Illinois?
I went to Milliken, which is right by all the state schools.
Okay, sure.
By
So
Eastern and U of I and ISU and all of them, right?
the college life, those were the days. Not really, but an experience for that time. But anyway, this was awesome, Ryan. Really appreciate your insights, your advice. Where can the audience reach you?
Yeah. So you want to listen to my podcast like this called The Scale Up Show. If you want to know more about me, my content, what I could do, who I serve, I would say my website, ryanstaley.io. It's going to get upgraded soon. But ryanstaley.io is a good one. And then I publish on LinkedIn all the time with content that I discussed in terms of written content, like what I share. So definitely check me out on those channels.
Awesome. All right, Ryan. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean.